Welcome. I am pleased to have with me Dr. Vanessa Panfil from the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. And she'll be talking and we'll kind of have an ongoing dialogue about creating an inclusive classroom environment. Vanessa, welcome and let's kick it off.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. So usually we think of the syllabus as the contract between the faculty member and the students that set and manage the expectations and the tone for the class. So let's talk about the syllabus and maybe you want to just talk to us about how you use the syllabus as a starting point to create that inclusive classroom environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so often like the syllabus is really the first thing that a student sees from from your class. And so usually I actually don't hand it out until a little bit into the first class so the student can see how the class actually runs. Because also I find that when you hand out a syllabus, it can be kind of an info dump, on a lot of info all at the same time. Um, but we also have a series of policies that we need to include in syllabi or should include in syllabi. But even within that, there are ways that we can write those to be more welcoming, more inclusive, but also just what we choose to provide, because there's a lot of flexibility in terms of what faculty can actually include in their syllabi, right? So um, like I'll give you some examples from mine. So, everyone across the university has to have an accommodations statement, related to the Office of Educational Accessibility and student accommodations. But some of the wording that can be used in those policies, they might say things like accommodations will not be provided until an accommodations letter is given to the instructor or that kind of thing. But even if you change the wording slightly to say something like accommodations will be made once that letter is provided, like instead of you will not get this until something happens, it's instead I'm prepared to give this, but there are procedures that happen before that. So even these really slight changes, will not be made until can sound almost punitive or threatening. Whereas, like, yes, I'm happy to make them once you go through this process. That can even like really small changes like that can just change the tenor or the tone of a syllabus. It feels very contractual in a lot of ways, right? On my syllabi, I also include basic needs policies. So, saying basically, your food security, your housing, your safety, those are all more important than anything going on in the class, because in order for you to be successful, those basic needs need to be met, right? And we do have some students at our university, like is true for many universities, where students need additional resources with food or housing or healthcare or their own safety. And so I include links to the ODU resources. Like folks might not know that ODU has a food pantry that also has toiletries and personal care supplies. And they also have pots of money, like if a student is in like an emergency situation, for something beyond their control. So, and students might not know that those resources are available, and they might not be willing to ask a professor about that. So you have it on your syllabus. There it is. They have the links, they have the info. You might also consider including like what I call a content advisory. So just a really generic statement about the kinds of things students might learn about. So some of the upper level electives I've taught here at ODU in the past few years include women in crime, LGBTQ people, crime and justice, and disability and justice. And so when you're talking about groups who might experience certain forms of violence or discrimination or exclusion, it can be really challenging and upsetting to students to read about that or learn about that, especially if they share experiences with those groups. And so I sometimes have, and I can provide examples that can be shared with folks watching this series. But just a brief content advisory that we are going to read depictions or hear about people who've experienced forms of violence or discrimination or exclusion, and that I don't present them to be shocking or exploitative, but we do need to learn about the very real and very serious things that happen in some people's lives. And so that's just a way to say, you will read about or hear some of this. And so if you have concerns, and I do say that in there too, if you have concerns, please come and talk to me. Because, although we want students to learn, we also don't want students to feel so upset during a class that they can't learn or can't engage, or they skip a class because they're concerned about what's going to come up that day. So those are helpful too. And then one last thing that I want to mention is, and I've been playing with this over the past couple of years. I don't know if I don't think I've perfected it yet. I guess we've never really perfected anything, right? But working on it. One of the things that I've been including is something that really just says, like, here's a note about this course, and what I in this short paragraph, I'm basically presenting like what the ethos of the class is, like what's the kind of orientation we're taking to learning about the material and learning about, challenging topics or things students might not learn about very often. And so you can just really set the ground rules for the course in a way that it just puts it right there and says, here's how we're going to engage around these topics. And so then students aren't like they have a baseline understanding of what's expected of them, but also what they can expect from me and what they can expect from each other. And so I would have to look at the exact statement, but I say something in my syllabus on my disability and justice class that, for example, one of the things that is going to guide our course is that people with disabilities are entitled to respect, dignity, and bodily autonomy. Like this is a basic understanding of how we're going to approach the material. We still discuss instances where someone's bodily autonomy might be in some ways controlled by someone else, whether that's the state or a caregiver, but we're talking about it in a way that assumes everyone is entitled to bodily autonomy, but then, what are the circumstances under which someone else might need to make decisions for someone, or someone else might need to care for someone in that way. And so if you start with a particular ground rule or an understanding of the topic, then it allows you to present different challenges or nuance to that in a way that everyone still understands what the broad goal of our sociological or criminological discussion is, but we still understand kind of the point we need to get back to, right? And so that's one thing that I'm happy to expand on if it comes up. But yeah, that's not all, but those are some of the things that I think are really helpful in creating inclusive classrooms and being able to generate discussion about like challenging or controversial topics.
Okay, so I'm going to take a quick detour because you
Yeah,
talked
please.
about this being something that you were playing with, or that you're
Hmm.
still perfecting, and not that we
Yeah,
ever do get to perfection.
right.
But as teachers, we do try out different things and we play around with
Hmm.
things to see how we might do things better. But sometimes it's not always better. Sometimes we fall
Right.
flat on our faces when we try to be
Yeah.
innovative, we try something different. So we were talking about things that you're putting in your syllabus.
Hmm.
If you're trying something new for the first time, what happens if you've put it in your syllabus and now it falls flat? I don't know if you've had any experience, but sometimes I think that's something that scares teachers from putting things, in kind of this a little bit more of that contracted language
Hmm.
because it's in the syllabus. So I just wasn't
Right.
if you wanted to speak to that a little bit, because I'm always interested in trying new things, but I shy away from putting it in the syllabus maybe necessarily because I'm not until I've tried it out. I'm not sure how comfortable I would be using it to set that expectation from day one.
Right. Yes. And that's one of the reasons why it's it's taken me some time, so I've been teaching undergraduate courses since 2008, and I also have taught master's and doctoral courses over my career. But so, I didn't used to have a content advisory. I didn't used to have a basic needs policy. I didn't used to have a note about this course in that way. I also didn't used to have an introduction to your professor paragraph. I didn't used to have, so my syllabi have gotten, I guess, longer and kind of more more involved over the years. But I think of those kinds of things less as related to the contract, but more about like helping just helping make expectations clear, but also, students having access to resources that they might be too concerned to ask for, or uh, yeah. So I'm trying to think. I'm sure because I'm always willing to talk about ways I failed. I'm trying to think of something I've put in a syllabus that I took out. Gosh, I'm not sure that I can think of one, but I do know that I'm not exactly sure that like the note about this course. I'm not exactly sure that that's necessary because on the first day, one of the things I go over is what I've finally landed on being crystallized as good intentions. And so in the syllabus, it's phrased in a more like substantive way to help not only guide students like through what the material might look like, but how they're expected to engage in the classroom. But like the first day, I talk about here's what I mean by this statement, or here's what I mean by good intentions. And I definitely want to say more about that. But so I'm not sure that I don't think that it failed as such, or I don't think it's bad to have those things, but I definitely think it's not enough to just put it in the syllabus and have it be there. I mean, you really have to like embody those values in the classroom. You have to demonstrate how you're, using that ethos or following that ethos. And so are these necessary? No. Could students get a sense, for example, that they might be reading about, let's say, violence or harassment or exclusion based on the title of a of a reading? Sure, right? I mean, so there's other context clues, but it just helps me kind of make a unified document that's again talking about not only the substantive things but also the way that we engage in the classroom. And also I should mention that my classes have a lot of discussion and in-class writing. The classes I'm talking about specifically are upper level electives. These will still hold for other courses, but that's also part of it, that these are students who've been in the classroom for a bit and kind of have an understanding of how things maybe work generally. And so I think also these might be more important if an instructor is doing something really innovative and a student is like, wait, I need to be reminded of how to do this thing. Maybe that's where it like needs to be in the syllabus. So yeah, so I'm not sure. I wouldn't say that they've failed or that they're ineffectual, but like they're not necessary if you're doing your job in other ways. If you're also telling students all the readings that they're going to do, if you're also living these values in the classroom, you don't need it on the syllabus, but I think it's a helpful messaging tool. If, the university is always talking about branding and things like that, Yeah. So that's my answer, non-answer to your question.
So the syllabus then is really kind of that starting point, right? To
Yeah.
frame it and then as that launching point. So let's talk about classroom interactions where this now actually gets played out.
Right.
Where would you suggest teachers start and set the stage for inclusion in this classroom environment?
Yeah, I mean, so I think like on your, like I said, on your first day, you probably have a lot of logistical things to do. Uh, I would say though, from like day one, try to learn your students' names. If you have a huge lecture, that's obviously kind of a different story, but actually getting to know a little bit about your students, and about their interaction styles is helpful, like from day one. Because it's helpful to build that rapport, in a classroom where you're trying to create an inclusive environment. But I would say also like in my courses, like I said, I don't go right into the syllabus. I say, you're here in this class. What kinds of things do you think we're going to be talking about? What kinds of things do you expect to learn about? I often do like word association. If you're if we're talking about disability, what kinds of things does that call up for you? What does the word justice mean? And so that's a place where, for example, if you take like an expansive view of a topic, it's great to talk about it in the first class. or at least starting in the first class, I mean. And as I mentioned earlier, like one of the things that I've now explicitly spent more time on in my courses is this idea of respectful communication, right? We all have these bits on our syllabus, you're expected to engage with the professor and each other in a respectful way, or at least I would guess most people have something like this on their syllabus. But like, what does that mean to be respectful, right? And if you think about it in some contexts, never disagreeing with someone is considered respectful. Never challenging a person in a position of authority is considered respectful. And the way that I run my courses, you can disagree with me or disagree with someone else or challenge a conclusion that, an author that you're reading about has made. Those are all, you can do that respectfully, and you should as a part of critical thinking. And it's sometimes hard for students to believe that, that they can challenge you or the things that they read, or like as an aside, they sometimes think you assign readings because you agree with everything that the author is saying, or that you agree with the conclusions that are being reached. And it's like, no, we're using that as a tool to get at something. But anyway, so I've been more explicit in the past few years, where when I say respectful communication, what I really mean is respectful interaction based on good intentions. And I'll say more what I mean. And again, it took me a long time to kind of land on that, but that's what I've landed on recently. And I'll tell you more what I mean. So students are often afraid to say the wrong thing, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to say something that's going to offend somebody, or I don't want to look stupid. That's their thought process, right? We've heard students say, well, this is probably a stupid question, but it's like, I swear, I'm not, I don't think I've ever heard a student ask a quote unquote stupid question when they say, oh, I think it's probably a stupid question. It's like, no, that's maybe the student's own anxieties talking, right? They want to make sure they're on the right track. But anyway, students are often afraid to say the wrong thing or look, like they're not as competent as their peers or that kind of thing. But what that does is it stifles discussion. It stifles questions. They don't want to ask questions, and it stifles learning. And there's actually research about this. I've been talking about this class that I've been teaching a couple times about disability and accessibility. And there's actually research that shows that people are less likely to talk about people with disabilities because they don't want to make a misstep. They don't want to say the wrong word, or they don't want to say something that might be offensive. And so then they just don't talk about disability at all. And the research also shows that that's harmful to people with disabilities, because then they're not being considered or getting the kinds of accommodations they need, or, we're not teaching students how to use language that makes that's respectful and accurate. And we're not talking about language debates, right? Different groups might prefer different kinds of language, um, and so the long and short of it is that it's actually way worse for people to not talk about a certain subject because they're afraid of making a mistake than it is for them to talk about it in an earnest way when they make mistakes. So it's actually better for students to make like low stakes mistakes in a classroom setting that's um, focused on learning, focused on improvement. And so, when I talk about these good intentions, I'm like, we're going to assume right now that if someone in class says something, like uses language that's considered outdated or harmful, we're going to assume that that was a mistake, and that we're going to model the correct language, and we're going to have a discussion about it, and not in a way that feels, like that student is being targeted, or like it's more of a learning kind of environment, and students will help each other then. And I don't just mean with language. I mean, I'll give you another example. Like in some of the subjects that I teach, there's a lot of misinformation, and what I would say are actually disinformation. Like there's misinformation propagated to intentionally cause confusion and, have false things sent around. And I want students to know they should be able to come to class and say, I read about this, or I heard about this. What's going on with that? What is that about? Is that true? What's the context of this? And if they're concerned about making a mistake, or they're concerned about how they'll look, they're not going to bring that to class. They're not going to engage deeper. So my assumption is always, so I've now decided that I was like, until it is very clear that someone doesn't have good intentions, we're going to assume they have good intentions. And if you're in this class and you don't have good intentions, if you don't want to learn, um, maybe this isn't the class for you. As a reminder, these are upper level electives. So, yeah, so like I wouldn't have known that was what I was really getting at though until I've taught these classes for like a long time. But yeah, so just related to that, like um, you want to affirm the behavior that you want. So you want to, or you want to affirm and model it too, right? So when somebody's curious, encourage that. Tell me more. What did that call up for you? What assumptions do you think are involved in that? So empathy, if they say, "Oh, I read this and it was really upsetting to me." Oh yeah, I can understand how that can be really upsetting. And other students in the class might also join in. Critical thinking, yeah, it's great that you're thinking about the other side of that issue and who else is involved in this issue. Again, you have to be open to disagreement. Some professors, that might be hard for them, but I would encourage you to be open to it. It will help you grow too. It will help you clarify how to explain concepts or what the actual content is. Yeah, and yeah, encourage criticism. And just as an aside, somebody in my department, I think this is another useful way of thinking about it. He says that he always says to his students, he will never try to embarrass them. And when he first said that to me, I was like, wow, it's interesting that he decided, this was something I needed to tell students. But I think it's a really useful way to think about it, that like I'm not, like, professors are not here to embarrass you, or this isn't a gotcha. This isn't a, I want you to be wrong. No, I want you to learn and grow. And I am never going to do anything that's going to try to stifle that. And so this is another example of that, good intentions kind of thing. Yeah, so those are some of the things I've done. Yeah.
So we've had a lot of good discussion, but I'm going to step back and put on my graduate student, early career faculty hat and say, wow, that's a lot of information. Now, what
It's
are
recorded, so you can consider it later.
that's true. It's recorded, so now they can come back and listen to it again. But if I want to now think about strategies for how I could implement this in the classroom, can you help us maybe go from kind of this, not that it was necessarily abstract, but a little bit higher level to now, what
Mhm.
can I do with some of the nitty-gritty actions in the
Totally.
classroom?
Totally. Yeah, like that day to day, how do you do the stuff of learning, but also model these behaviors, or this ethos. So, I mean, one thing that I would always suggest is that if possible, and I know some of the ways that classes are structured, this can be tricky, but I would say if possible, allow students time to write their thoughts down before discussing them. So even a really brief in-class writing assignment can be super helpful for them to just get their thoughts out on paper, understand kind of where their perspective is, what they want to say or think, and then go from there. There's a reason that putting students in small groups is really popular in some disciplines, and that they can learn from each other. There's a lot of research about students learning effectively from each other. And then, you can have them all work on a particular problem, or, like a particular question or issue, report back to the class. These are things that can take 10 or 15 minutes of your class time, but can just really help students, not only get to know each other, build additional rapport, but learn from each other, feel a little less pressure, to perform in the academic setting. So those are like really easy, 10 to 15-minute strategies that can be super helpful. Something that I found in my classes is that students really respond well to documentaries or to like investigative journalism, where there's actually like clips of interviews or people talking about their experiences, because it really shows that human experience. And students are like, yeah, I mean, I understood this on an academic level, but once I actually heard someone talk about what happened to them as a result of X, Y, or Z, I had a much better understanding. And also the way that we as a society consume media these days, like um, a lot of folks watch their content or listen to their content instead of reading it. And so it's also just like more comfortable, I guess, in some ways, or more engaging to some students. And ODU has access to a lot of great documentaries through the libraries or through. Do we have Canopy? I think we still have Canopy. Maybe I should check. But regardless, you can get documentaries through the ODU library so that your students can watch them or you can show them in class. And so those are really helpful. Just doing some reflection, either written or in a class discussion, about what they've learned and how they can or will use this information moving forward. And ODU also has a ton of resources about reflection prompts. And so that's something else I would recommend. There's the Pursue Truth workshops here at ODU that have a ton of strategies for critical reading and reflection and just lots of amazing stuff. And I know that a lot of those are accessible to everyone on ODU's website. So yeah, like there are things you can do in the classroom that don't take a lot of time, but can really be beneficial. It also can be helpful to have sessions where students can ask questions anonymously, whether they're writing it on a slip of paper or whether they're putting it into a Google form that could even be live in the classroom. But I found like some of the most compelling questions students have ever asked in my classes are them asking a question where they're grappling with two things, right? Or grappling with a paradox. They're saying, how can this thing be true when we know all this other stuff is true? And a lot of times the student knows there's some tension there. There's something, they're like, why they think, why am I not getting it? And then I'm able to tell them, no, these things are both true. And here's the context under which we can understand it. And so sometimes the most compelling questions I've gotten have been anonymous questions from students who didn't want to show the whole classroom that they maybe didn't understand something. They knew what they were talking about, but they were like, I need more information about it. So yeah, anonymous questions can be helpful too. And I sometimes get silly ones when I do that. So then that's funny too. Like sometimes I'll be like, okay, so I know that we're talking about this today, but to bring a little bit of levity, I also got this kind of silly question. And I would still count that under good intentions, right? Because someone doesn't have a content question, but they're like, let me try to still contribute. And so yeah, so those are just some strategies that you can use that work even for like the 50-minute classes, which I know that a lot of GTAs might have these like they usually have those shorter class periods, like the 50-minute or the 75-minute classes. And so often I teach the 2.5 hour blocks, and so these are strategies you can use in any time block. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa, for joining me in this discussion. And I very much appreciate the insights that you have. And I hope that our audience will take some tidbits and nibbles from here and there and help them in creating an inclusive classroom environment, maybe not necessarily for teaching difficult topics, but just for creating an environment where students feel like they can be part of that learning environment and they can
Right.
contribute. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for chatting with me about this. It's always excellent to be able to reflect on your own teaching and what works for you and what you might try in the future. So this was a great exercise just for me to even think about our conversation today.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.